Prime Minister is only really surviving because they have made the calculation that their interests are best served in dictating terms to the Prime Minister about the sort of ideological flavour, or at least the poses this government strikes, as well as the culture and the way it governs and presents itself to the country. They've concluded that is cleaner and in the immediate term easier than getting rid of the Prime Minister, which is a very messy and bloody process in the Labour Party.
Now, the good news today for Keir Starmer is that he's suddenly looking safer in his job. Less worth celebrating is that you'll struggle to find anyone who imagines he's likely to lead the party through another election. It is possible now to imagine him staying in place, well, beyond this month's Gorton by-election and the local Scottish and Welsh elections in May. I say it's possible. I don't say it's overwhelmingly likely. And one reason for that, perhaps, if you realise we're trading here in the unstable currency of Westminster gossip, is that Wes Streeting, the ambitious Health Secretary, may have rather overplayed his hand, or certainly misplayed his hand. Streeting may have denied any intention to move against Starmer once too often for the liking of his colleagues, once too loudly. And after joining colleagues in pledging loyalty to the PM during the failed rebellion by Labour's leader in Scotland, he found himself doing it again last night after supporters told journalists that Streeting might yet launch his own rebellion after the voters in Gorton go to the polls in 2 weeks' time. Now, true, you don't declare you're going to lead a rebellion until the moment that you do it. But maybe, I know there's a certain familiarity about this stuff to Labour MPs, and maybe there's a cost to it in credibility. It is maybe suggested Labour MPs have had enough, and maybe that his credibility as a rebel in waiting has rather drained away. Let's talk about that. Now, earlier in the programme, I spoke to the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, who told me about the display of unity around Keir Starmer in the Labour Party.
We strongly believe that this Prime Minister won a mandate for change and has to be allowed to do that job, and that any suggestion that we should go back to the dark old days of switching out Prime Ministers and factional infighting that we saw under the Tories would be a disaster for the country, and it's not what we were elected to do. That doesn't mean that we don't believe, and I firmly believe, that we have to be more ambitious, we have to be far bolder, we have to wear our colours on our sleeve. We're not a government of national emergency, we're a Labour government, and people have to see our values. They have to understand that we care about the things they care about.
That's Lisa Nandy talking to me just a short while ago here on Drive. Now, we welcome to the programme Patrick Maguire, the Times chief political commentator. Hello to you, Patrick.
Hello, John.
Patrick, good to have you here. Just give me your take on where we are at the moment. It seems that we got Starmer in office, but trapped in a kind of political hiatus, a stasis. MPs, a lot of MPs don't want him, but they can't see a route to remove him.
No, exactly. And I think what we've seen this week is a change of leadership in the Labour Party. And by that, of course, I don't mean the Prime Minister, but a change in the sort of organising, moral authority, the locus of sort of political organisation, political authority and moral authority in the Labour Party. It's moved from people like Morgan McSweeney to the MPs and party figures who always felt frozen out under the last iteration of Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. I'm talking about cabinet ministers and MPs on the soft left.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister is only really surviving because they have made the calculation that their interests are best served in dictating terms to the Prime Minister about the sort of ideological flavour, or at least the poses this government strikes, as well as the culture and the way it governs and presents itself to the country. They've concluded that is cleaner and in the immediate term easier than getting rid of the Prime Minister, which is a very messy and bloody process in the Labour Party.
I mean, you have to wonder, Patrick, how sustainable is that sort of remote control leadership?
Well, look at the past 18 months. Not very. If you don't have a Prime Minister who's willing to lead, who's willing to make arguments, who is able to lead and make arguments, you very badly come unstuck. I was talking to a Labour strategist from the last generation of Keir Starmer advisors just before we came on, and their view was that, look, there's always been this criticism that Keir Starmer is in some way a patsy or a puppet, or is controlled or given his politics by other people, which they always firmly resisted in the last iteration of Downing Street. But the things the Prime Minister is now doing to survive, throwing former aides like Morgan McSweeney and Matthew Doyle under the bus, notwithstanding the serious questions around Matthew Doyle and what Downing Street knew and when about his association with a child sex offender. What's about to happen, this accommodation with the soft left of the Labour Party, is about to spectacularly vindicate that criticism of Keir Starmer as a passive Prime Minister, I think.
Yeah.
But, you can survive day to day, week to week, month to month on that, but the collision with electoral reality is still coming in a big way, first in Gorton and then in May.
I've been focusing rather today, Patrick, on women in the Labour Party at Westminster, and it's not a new demand. It is there, but it's as strong as it's ever been for the leadership of the party to listen to them and take into account the concerns of women, which are quite often distinct from the concerns of men. They don't feel they've been heard. They don't feel that the phone's picked up when they call in the way that some men's calls from men are. And that creates an obligation, doesn't it, on the Prime Minister? He needs friends. He's reaching out in that way. If he doesn't deliver, well, then a deep hole could get deeper rather than shallower.
Yeah, indeed. It's going to have to be a demonstrative process from the Prime Minister, because clearly, if you listen to reports out of the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party, the Prime Minister addressed today, people like Harriet Harman saying he needs to appoint a female First Secretary of State and oversee a complete culture change. It's clear, after the events of the past week to 10 days, lots of women in the Labour Party won't accept anything less.
Yeah.
And, but it's not just about culture, it's about who wields power in the Labour Party. And to some extent, this question of culture and this question of power and this question of direction, they're all linked, because the open, collaborative, inclusive culture the Prime Minister has been talking about all week will necessarily bring people into conversations in Downing Street, with the Prime Minister, who've been frozen out before. And that creates an opportunity, opens up political space for the government to move in the sort of political direction Morgan Sweeney never wanted it to move.
Right. I mean, just a word, if I could, Patrick, on Wes Streeting. His ambitions to be the leader of the party are very, very well understood. And the pattern of warlike briefings, quiet briefings around Westminster, and then very public denials. I mean, again, that is the way the game is played. But are we seeing this now playing out in a way which is getting a bit wearing for many MPs?
Yeah, indeed. Look, I think lots of MPs and some of Wes Streeting's cabinet colleagues are getting sick of the cycle of Wes Streeting is briefed against and Wes Streeting issues an explosive complaint to the newspapers that he's being briefed against. And this background hum of leadership speculation isn't going to go away. It's a symptom rather than a cause. It's a symptom of political instability. It's a symptom of questions over the Prime Minister's leadership. And it's a symptom of how difficult this crisis of leadership in the Labour Party, which is what it is going to be to resolve. It's not going anywhere. And that is the ultimate issue for the Prime Minister as he seeks to build consensus, bring new voices into the room, repair his standing among women in the Labour Party. All of these things come with political trade-offs. All of them involve freezing out and deprioritising people who've been listened to before. And in politics, as in physics, there is always an equal and opposite reaction when you do that. And the Prime Minister, I'm sure, will experience that too in the coming weeks and months.
All right, so good to talk to you, Patrick. Thank you. Patrick Maguire there, the chief political commentator at The Times.